Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming to spend an hour with us today talking about congestion pricing. And there we go. And what we've seen from the first 3 months of this program so far. I'll begin with just a brief introduction. My name is Matt Yari. I'm a data science manager on the MTA Data and Analytics team. Our overall team is about 25 folks. Some of them are in the room here. And our mission is to bring modern data techniques to bear at the MTA. What that means is we build modern data infrastructure for all of the MTA. We own the product experience of what does it mean to use analytics at the MTA. We manage our institution's open data program, and we try to use all of this for the most interesting policy questions facing the MTA, which today is congestion pricing. As we go through this talk today, I'm going to have the privilege to present some of the work from an excellent team of data scientists, policymakers, and analysts. You can see some of them here. I'll just kind of point in the general direction of a few folks who are here in the room. So if you want to do the Where's Waldo and look for one of these faces, they would love to talk to you afterwards about this project and what we've seen so far. So talking about, kind of what it took to make congestion pricing a reality here in New York, it's more than time. It's more than we have time to probably cover in one talk, but when I was thinking about what would be interesting to this audience, first, of course, I hope you'll leave here with a sense of how congestion pricing is working for these first 3 months. But I also hope you'll get a sense of what does it look like for a data team to come together for this type of program. What is the preparation that's needed? How does it all come together? And you get kind of a behind the scenes piece of what this looks like. So with that, as we go through this story, there are kind of 3 sections. First, we're going to talk about before the launch, what does it take to kind of be prepared for this kind of very public rollout of a new policy. We'll spend a lot of time talking about vehicle entries, kind of what is the simplest and most straightforward metric to look at for how this program is working. And 3, once we go through that, once we we show the hard work that it takes to make something simple, and you understand that, you can ask more interesting questions. What are we seeing on our streets? What are we seeing with our buses? We'll talk about some of that today as well. So starting with kind of the roll-up before the launch, we'll talk a little bit about the timeline, spend a little time talking about the role of a data team. I think for the technical folks in the audience, you'll be interested to hear a little bit about how the tolling system works. And we'll spend a little time talking about the MTA Data Lake, which is kind of our team's core offering. Again, a separate talk, but is the engine that we used to make all this work. So as folks remember, while congestion pricing kind of stopped and started again, if you rewind your calendar back to November, on November 15th, Governor Hochul announced that congestion pricing would be going live on January 5th. This became something that our team put on a whiteboard, and we essentially did a countdown of we have only 7 weeks to get this program ready. Of course, a lot of work had been done. There have been 5 years of environmental assessment, review, the tolling infrastructure had been built, but there is a lot of work that still needs to happen to make sure the technical system works and that everyone is ready for this to go through. So in those 7 weeks, maybe I'll just mention briefly what is the role, as I see it, of a data team. First, the most important job is to see the world clearly, to provide a clear single source of truth for what's happening and to make sure everyone understands it. And the second, at a place like the MTA, but I think any organization, is to serve as a relationship bridge, to make sure that everyone, both inside the organization but out in the public as well, is working and thinking through this same clear source of truth. What that looks like, of course, in this case, we do a lot of talking back and forth with the technical tolling system and the team that operates it. We use this to make sure, every day folks have an understanding of what's happening as metrics come in and data gets collected. We use this, of course, to do analysis. We want to understand what is happening with this program and in the city. But then it's also to talk to all of these folks, the policy team, the open data team, the finance team, legal team, other agencies, and ultimately the public. So I think when folks think about, if you are a data practitioner or work on a data team, it's not just working with the data, but it's owning this piece too. It's how do you make sure everyone is rowing together on the same current. So with that, let's jump into congestion pricing. So first, I think we should start with where is it and what is the Central Business District? The Central Business District is the area south of 60th Street, south of and including 60th Street. There's a little bit of further division. There are excluded roadways. The FDR Drive and the West Side Highway do not receive a toll, but all the other areas in orange, called the Congestion Relief Zone, is subject to a toll. If you're a vehicle that's equipped with a GPS, this is actually a pretty straightforward exercise. On the right-hand side is a geofence that our team made and is in use by all of the taxis, Lyfts, Ubers, to essentially track, just did a vehicle cross the boundary and wind up in the zone. But for all of the other vehicles, you have to have a bit more of an elaborate tolling system if you don't have access to this information. So if folks have walked through Manhattan, you might have seen some of these tall 90-degree mast arms with what is a very advanced camera hanging from the rail there. There are about 100 of these detection points. They ring the perimeter of the CBD, and their job is to capture inbound vehicles when they cross the zone. Maybe just to say a little bit, each of these I think has 2, 3 NVIDIA GPU cards on it. It captures EasyPass transponders. It does machine vision to kind of pull out license plates, and it also identifies vehicle type as they come. It's a very cool piece of hardware that exists on each of these mast arms. But it gets a little more complicated still. So if you just want to think about, for folks who try to imagine, you have all this data being collected, how does it work for customers, and how would you have to understand it to work with the data? First, you have detections. These are instances of the camera taking a picture or reading an EasyPass transponder. And this might happen a number of times as a car passes underneath. You get the 2 images of the front license plate, you get 3 of the rear license plate, and by collecting that, you have a much better or a much more robust view of what happened. These get collapsed into a transaction. So there's a work to say all right, we had 5 camera detections. How do we turn into a transaction? Think of that as a single instance of a vehicle passing underneath a gantry. And maybe I'll just add one more thing. We are doing this in an urban environment with a lot of buildings, with parked vehicles, pigeons, garbage trucks, things on the side of the road. So some percentage of these detections actually go through human review, where we say, the computer vision says this needs another look. Take a look at this image and just let us know what's going on. I mention all that because, as will come later when we talk about what does it take to release metrics quickly, this adds a couple days of delay, and we had to make sure folks were well prepared, as this was a key part of the program. After you have all these transactions, you have to stitch that together in a trip. A car may go in on the Brooklyn Bridge, go up on the FDR Drive, exit at another point, in doing so passing through 5 of these gantries. So how do you take all of that and put that into a trip? That's kind of the next piece of this pipeline. And then after that, someone gets a toll. So depending on the time that someone entered, the type of vehicle, whether it was their first or repeat entry of the day, or if they are part of any exemption programs, ultimately they receive a toll on their EasyPass account or in the mail. For today, what we will be focusing on is trips. So I'll kind of use the word vehicle entries a few times. What we're talking about there is a single instance of a vehicle taking a trip that brings them into Lower Manhattan. So as you can kind of even just maybe see from that, this is a lot of data coming from just this system. We have millions of detections taking place every day, millions of transactions, and hundreds of thousands of trips that all need to be processed and understood if we want to have a sense of what's happening with this program. The reason that we have been able to work with this data so quickly, and again, this is the subject of another talk or a hallway conversation, is the MTA spent the last 2 years building something we call the MTA Data Lake. It's built on top of Azure, Airflow, Kubernetes, and Spark to essentially manage all of the next day analytics for the MTA. So while we use this for congestion pricing, this is the system we use to measure ridership on our subways and buses, where our buses are, where all the hardware is in the MTA system. And I think I was talking to our head of data engineering yesterday. We process about 300 billion rows of data every morning so that users at the MTA, and ultimately the open data public as well, can query it in seconds. So that's kind of what this is. And what you can see here is this is the actual Airflow DAG that we used for the launch of congestion pricing, processes each of those trips, and helps us understand what's happening. And the result is, essentially having all of this data next day from a single source of truth. So when you have this, it becomes possible to have shared clarity about a program. On the left, jumping ahead, this is kind of the open data metrics page. These are hourly entries that everyone in this room can currently work with. And on the right-hand side is some internal reporting that we developed for everyone to work on this program, look at this program every morning when they came into work. And the numbers are the same, and the data is the same. The internal team is looking at the exact same thing that the members of the public are, and having that come together, I think, has been really important for folks having just a very clear understanding of what's going on. And finally, again, just because the MTA has been for years now investing in having really strong data infrastructure, all of this was able to work really quickly on day one. So with that, we're going to now jump into the kind of key metrics for this program, what we've been seeing so far. So we'll talk a little bit about the importance of having fast metrics. We'll talk about the importance of having a clear counterfactual. What does it mean to roll out a program and have a clear measure of success for it? We'll spend some time talking about what we're seeing, and then maybe do a little bit of what we're seeing in terms of traffic. So just to maybe start with a note on the importance of having clear metrics quickly for this kind of rollout. On January 5th, this is when the program went live. When do people want to know what's happening with this program? The very next day. You can't, right away, people want to know what's going on, what's happened. And while some things we can't say the next day, we want to understand really quickly what's happening. Because of everything I mentioned in kind of the preparation part of this presentation, we were actually able to do this really quickly. We were able to share data with the press on Friday, just 4 days after the program launched, of what we were seeing in terms of vehicle speeds, reduced traffic, and we were able to hold our first public briefing the Monday after. And I think I just want to pause and say, for folks who work in government or work with organizations, I am very proud of the team for being able to do this so quickly. I think this was a real effort that took a lot of sleepless nights, but also worked because of all the preparation work that was there. And I think this has been critical to our collective understanding of the program and the public sentiment that currently exists for it. This is kind of the New York Times story that ran 5 days after the program launched. And you'll see on the right-hand side are those vehicle entry numbers that we just talked about. And you'll see for every day of the program, this is what it was. Here's how many vehicles came in, which just, I think, was really clear for folks to understand. And also the first time that I think most people had really thought about how many vehicles are actually entering Manhattan every day. So with that, let's spend a little time on vehicle entries and why we focus so much on it. So if you were to make a simple theory of change for this program, first thing we're doing is we're applying entry tolls. You are going to have to pay a toll if you are driving into Lower Manhattan. The hope is that by doing so, there will be fewer vehicles entering the CBD every day. And after that, you get all the other benefits that folks have been excited about with this policy. less congestion, faster road speeds, a safer pedestrian environment, better bus performance, higher transit usage, honking, trash, you name it. It all follows from this first kind of metric. Are there fewer vehicles coming into the CBD? So this is kind of the thing that we wanted to make sure we got really right and really clear. Holding on what the number is, just maybe to talk a little bit about the importance of having a counterfactual or a baseline. I think a lot of programs launch and they don't always think about this in advance. They don't say, what is our measure of success going to be, or what do we think would have happened had this program not happened or not gone into effect? When it comes to vehicle traffic, this was actually a little tricky. New York City, before we built all of these cameras around the city, did not have a comprehensive way to measure traffic for every day of the year. It only had a couple partial views. There's kind of an annual study that goes back for the last couple of years that will tell you overall traffic on the average day in October, called the Hubbound Report. There are monthly river crossing volumes that come out for the Port Authority, the DOT, and the MTA. The MTA, I'll say we do release our river crossing data hourly. Not all other agencies do that. And then there is some limited pre-launched system testing data. So the cameras were running kind of for over the fall. We were using that time to mostly make improvements to the algorithm and kind of do ongoing system testing. But that did give us a little bit of a sense of what was happening, in this period when the program had not yet relaunched. And I think I'll just mention on this notion of a counterfactual or baseline, you want it to be simple, accurate, and very understandable. As soon as you start debating what is the baseline, I think you've lost the conversation. So the goal with this was to keep it really simple. And with that, there's kind of two parts that do make this simple. First, you want to understand what is overall traffic in the city. It's been about 640,000 vehicles in October for the last 3 years. It's actually been very consistent. So 2022, there were 642. 2023, 639. We measured around 644. So it's essentially all circling around a clear sense of about 640,000 vehicles come in October. Now, we were launching in January, and so there's another question, which is, okay, that tells you October, but as everyone knows, January is a cold month. People do not go out as much, so how do you know, and traffic goes down anyway. So how do you know that if traffic is lower than 640, that it's really due to the program and not due to just it being cold outside? On the right-hand side, you can essentially see from those 3 years of monthly river crossing data, there's a clear pattern to how traffic varies throughout the year. January traffic is about 9% lower than October. February traffic is about 4% lower. And by March, you're kind of at the same place as you were. So this allows you to essentially say, okay, we know what traffic would have been had this program not launched. It's about 9% less than 642,000. So this lets us have a clear understanding. You can kind of just track the program here. So on the first few months, you can say we were expecting about 580,000 entries per day. That's including weekends, so it's kind of average day throughout the week, growing in February and growing in March. So I'm going to pause here for a trivia question. If folks have paper or a phone to write down your guess, how many fewer vehicles entered the CBD last week, this is the week of March 16th, as a result of congestion pricing? So actually write something down. I'm gonna see how close folks get, but. All right. So last week, it was 560,000. So raise your hand if you put a number that started with 5, between 50 and 60,000. All right, you're under. How many people said 70 to 80? All right, and how many people said around 82,000, between 80 and 90? All right, I saw one hand. One person guessed in the 80s. So 82,000 fewer vehicles have entered Manhattan every day of the week since this program, for the last couple weeks. I want to pause for a sec and just kind of say 80,000 vehicles is a lot of space on our streets. If the average car is about 16 feet, 15, 16 feet, This is 242 linear miles of cars that we are talking about. This was kind of a fun Rorschach test, I'd say internally. Everyone has a clear opinion on what is the right way to visualize this, so I will show all three, and you can decide which one works best for you. 80,000 vehicles is enough to fill a parking lot that covers 3/4 of Central Park. That would essentially go from 60th Street up to 98th Street, all filled with cars. It is enough to fill all lanes of all of the avenues north of Houston Street twice. Just picture all of those roads just filled with cars twice over. Or it is enough to form a line from here to the White House. So of those three, you can decide which one fits your mental model the best. I think just maybe zooming out a little bit, this effect has been pretty consistent. Every week we've seen about an 11 to 13% reduction in traffic against what we think, against that counterfactual. And this lets us just kind of clearly count internally and in the public, what is this first order effect of the program? Every day for the last few weeks, it's been about 80,000 fewer vehicles. It's about 500,000 fewer vehicles per week. And since the start of the program, it's been about 5 million fewer vehicles deterred from this program. And then I think the other thing that was really notable about this period is that within 3 weeks of the program launching, all of this data was posted publicly to open data. I am not sure what the record is of like how quickly other agencies have done this, but this felt like a record. This felt like it was a very fast effort, and I want to thank a few folks in the team and then Lisa in the audience who runs our open data program for making this happen so quickly. And it's not just the vehicle totals. We wanted folks in this room to be able to work with the details of this data. This is data that is, you can, with this data set, look at how many vehicles are entering every 10 minutes by detection point, by vehicle class, and how many of them ultimately go into the congestion relief zone versus stay on those excluded roadways. So all of that's here to work with. We did a blog post of kind of some of the detailed things you can find. I'll let folks jump into that on their own, but you can download this and this data comes out every week. We've talked about the high level. You can use this data to understand the low level, just to give a sense of what you can do with it. These are passenger vehicle entries on the Williamsburg Bridge for the average weekday. You can see some fun things. You can see a lot of people race in before the toll changes at 5 p.m. Then if they've missed it, they kind of get coffee or they wait. They're kind of bummed for a bit. And then same thing at 9 o'clock, you have folks kind of entering there. And this is just, I think, a quirky, fun example, but just shows how people are changing their behavior pretty quickly from this. You can do things like understand how traffic enters from the entire region. About 43% of our entries come from Upper Manhattan, 24% from Brooklyn, 17% from New Jersey, and 16% from Queens. And you can, again, see kind of here's how they're coming in by each of those different crossings to Lower Manhattan. And I think, maybe just to say this again, like this detail and the very simple facts of the program can be seen with clarity by the entire public. You can download the data off the portal, or you can go to our metrics website where this updates live with how many vehicles are coming in each day. So now that we've kind of talked about the simple metric, how many fewer vehicles are we seeing, this opens us up to ask some more interesting ones. And I want to just say, if you don't get to do the simple things, you could have spent 3 months just on that. And so by getting that out of the way, we now get to kind of dig into what will be some more technical plots for this group. So first, are vehicles getting to the CBD faster? The short answer is yes. So this is data that comes from an entity called Transcom. The data is two sources. It is vehicle GPS data and seeing how fast they're moving, and it is E-ZPass readers. They kind of measure how quickly cars move across road segments. And this is showing inbound travel times for weekday morning commute across each of the river crossings to Manhattan. So this is what this is showing is speeds this year compared to speeds last year. So we are seeing double-digit improvements in travel times. Sorry, this is travel time. Improvements in travel times for each of the bridges going in. You also get to learn a little bit about things as you go through this. The Manhattan Bridge has actually been pretty well flowing for the last couple of years, but the Williamsburg and the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel are ones that have often run into extreme delays and congestion. This is showing kind of the overall overall picture, but if you think about the human experience of people actually driving into Manhattan, people don't tend to think about, my commute was 9 minutes and today it was 8 minutes. They tend to think about, did I have an awful 40-minute stuck in traffic experience? And so what this is showing is how many severe delays have been taking place on each of these bridges and tunnels since the program started, or how many folks have had to wait 3 more minutes beyond what's called free flow, just traffic kind of moving. And you can see some pretty remarkable numbers here. In the Williamsburg Bridge, which was frequently one of the most backed up bridges, 65% of the time you were experiencing a delay. That's been cut to about 8% since the program launched. Similarly, on the Queensboro Bridge, that was about 50%. Now it's down to about 14%. This kind of note on its, yes, things are faster, but really there's greater reliability. It's a theme that will come up with a number of these. So that's folks getting to the CBD. Once they are there, are they moving faster? These are some technical plots, but I think this group can handle it. This is from a Stanford working paper put out by Professor Shoshana Wasserman, where she essentially is using Google Trip data to measure how fast vehicles are circulating throughout the city. This first slide, this is kind of the main takeaway, which is when you compare New York to similar cities, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, that before the program launched, if one was congested, they kind of ran together. They would all sort of experience the same seasonal patterns. Since January, they have split. New York City's CBD is now moving about 15% faster than those other cities in terms of vehicles moving around within the zone. They also do something that I think was just very cool descriptively, which is because they have origin and destination data from Google, they can measure how much of a given road has traffic that is going to and from the CBD. So it's a little small, but on the lower right-hand side, you can see those are roads where 80 to 100% of the traffic is going to and from the CBD. They are roads that make sense. It's the Gowanus Expressway, it's the lead into the Lincoln Tunnel, but you can kind of see how this radiates out through the rest of the city. In the 60 to 80% level, it goes all the way down the BQE to Bay Ridge, and the 40 to 60%, you include much of northern Manhattan. And the point of this is by changing, by reducing the trips to this area, does the benefit radiate outside of that area as well? And what they are finding is essentially yes. So if you look at just the CBD, vehicles are moving about 15% faster. They're moving about 16% faster right next to the CBD, and then about 8% on those roads that are adjacent. This was a question I think a lot of folks had, which is if you make this change in one part of the city, what does it do elsewhere? And I think it's been very encouraging to see that so far, the benefit has gone outside of the CBD as well, and we are not seeing this traffic displacement in the way that folks had worried. And then finally, just on this paper, they do a fun thing, which is they measure the nonlinear relationship between speeds and entries. This is something that you see in the literature all the time, but I think it's been very cool to actually see theory become practice these last couple months. And what that means is we're talking about an 11 to 13% reduction in vehicle traffic, but a 20 to 30% improvement in travel time. And the reason for that is what you can see here, that these are nonlinear relationships, and if you make a small change on the Williamsburg Bridge, that can actually have very outsized returns because you are no longer reaching the constraints of that road. So that's the story we've seen so far for overall vehicles. Let's talk about our buses. So our buses are a little bit different. They have to pick up passengers. They are bigger. There are more obstacles that befall them on their route. However, we are seeing all local buses make 3% faster trips within the CBD. kind of all routes, which I think is interesting. All of them are moving faster, but really we're seeing a big improvement on our express buses. So for express buses making stops in the CBD, which includes those crossings over the river, they're moving about 21% faster than they did last year. I think that's good for telling the story in the aggregate, but I think with a good data team who's been planning for this kind of thing and has built a lot of infrastructure, you can really dig into the human story a bit more. So what this is here, a subject of another talk, but we ingest into our data lake bus GPS data every 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, the bus sends a signal back to home saying this is where I am. And we use this to infer how fast buses are going, are they encountering delays, and we can look at the very clear, like fine-grained details of a specific bus run. So what this is showing is the B39, which is a bus that it's a short route, goes back and forth over the Williamsburg Bridge. And using this GPS data, we could see where was this speed benefit actually materializing? What part of the route was running faster? And it's essentially, the second half of the bridge. You would have traffic back up on that bridge as it came to Delancey Street. And now you can see year over year, it's moving faster beginning in that section. And that the overall folks are saving 4 minutes every time they take this bus across the bridge. This works for longer routes as well. There's a lot of folks who take our express buses from deep Staten Island all the way into Midtown. This is one that the Sim 24 is one that picks up near Richmond, goes up through New Jersey, across the Lincoln Tunnel. And I think this is just very fun. You can see right where the Lincoln Tunnel starts, where the Lincoln Tunnel ends, how much faster this bus has been moving through that tunnel, and how it's saved about 7 minutes in that section alone. So this is some of the things you can do when you are able to go deep on the data. These are slides, and then these are slides that I think some folks said were a little too complicated, but I think this group can do it. This is a slide showing essentially how many severe delays does each bus route experience. So it's a histogram of every single trip, in this case that the QM32 ran. On the left-hand side, you can see how many of those trips came in on the schedule, 5 minutes late from the schedule, 20 minutes late from the schedule. And you can see how that distribution has changed after the launch of congestion pricing. This is all year over year. So whereas before, about 54% of trips would be over 10 minutes late for this bus, that has been cut down to 20%. And the overall distribution has moved much further to the left. Again, this is the point that not just is it faster to ride the bus, but people are having fewer of those really bad experiences that they text their friends about, they text us at the MTA about, and that can really make your day frustrating. So we're very excited to see that change. Maybe just go through a few more of these. This happens as well. This is kind of the Staten Island routes. Those were moving a little bit faster from the Hugh Carey Tunnel, but again, a reduction from 15% to 9%. And we're seeing it on the crosstown routes in Manhattan as well. So this is the M42. That went from about a quarter of the time. It would run 5 minutes behind schedule. Now it's down to 13%, and it's much closer to zero, where more of these buses are no longer encountering delays and obstacles and getting passengers to their destinations quicker. I will also mention a fun thing about the M42, which is that this is a free running bus. So now that we've made this change on our roads, in early February, we started a pilot to allow buses on select routes to run ahead of schedule. So normally when a bus runs, it tries to keep to a schedule and prevent bus bunching so that passengers are getting a consistent wait time. But now that we're seeing faster road speeds and less obstacles, if you take one of these 6 routes, that bus driver is just going to try to get there as quick as you can. And we're running this pilot, and we're seeing essentially what's happening on these routes compared to other local routes in Manhattan. So more to come on that, but I think a very fun example of a real-world experiment that you can run quickly once conditions change on the ground. And then I think I'll just mention a few things. I think as we're talking about all of these changes to our, what we're seeing in bus and vehicle speeds, It is happening in a context of growing transit ridership. As more folks come back to the office, as more, we rolled out a student Omni program that's seen great success. In general, we've continued to see strong growth across each of the MTA's operating agencies. Now, as folks remember from earlier, it's 80,000 vehicles, and this is 300,000 more subway riders year over year. So this is not driven by congestion pricing. I don't want anyone to leave here with that understanding. But I think just the point being that New Yorkers are continuing to use transit and it is growing, I think is a really important backdrop to this whole story. And then I think a final note, which is just that with more data in the public domain, this has really become a shared project across the city. With more things on open data, public and private, it was really cool to see some of the analysis that came from outside the agency in this time and kind of from the larger community of New Yorkers who cared about this program. So, if you look at open data from Broadway League, Broadway shows are up, restaurant reservations are up, and then this is the one that I think a lot of folks love. 311 complaints about excessive car honking is down 70% from open data year over year. And the DEP noise cameras have actually not issued a single citation so far this year. So with that, maybe I'll end with just a few concluding thoughts here before we move to questions. First, 3 months in, this program is working. We are seeing very clearly that traffic is down, that speeds are up, and that we are already seeing a real benefit on our streets. The second is that it does take a lot of work to see the world clearly, but once you do, the results hopefully speak for themselves. I hope today folks will have a sense of the work, preparation, and teamwork across many disciplines, from data engineers to analysts to the public to policymakers, that go into telling this kind of story the right way. And third, that these civic projects are really shared endeavors. I think the paradigm of open data has been a really clear winner. I'm really proud of the MTA's open data program for getting these results out in 2 weeks post-launch from a very technical system. And then it's allowed academics, policymakers, the press, activists, and all of the nerds in this room to have a clear stake in this effort. And I think more and more as that model continues, it is becoming the expectation. And then finally, I think just a note on shared endeavors. If I can borrow a line, I don't know if folks heard like Martha's line earlier, but it is 75 degrees out. Everyone here could have been outside, but instead you've chosen to be here to learn about congestion pricing because we all care about this city and we care about how these programs can help us write our own history for how we use our streets. So I want to thank everyone for coming. This year we're talking about congestion pricing. Who knows what we'll be talking about next year. And thank you everyone for giving us your time. All right.
Thank you so much, Matt. For folks that want to answer questions, do you want me to help you kind of have a queue? Maybe folks can raise their hand. And before you ask your question, could you just say your name and pronouns? And I'll kind of keep a queue running. So please raise your hand if you have a question. All right, let's start over here. You in the blue shirt.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Ricardo Toledo Crow. I'm from the Advanced Science Research Center, part of CUNY. This makes me super happy. This is the second congestion pricing I lived through because I lived through the Stockholm one, and it works really well.
That makes you very rare in the world to have seen 2 congestion pricings.
Yeah. What have people done? Have they stopped coming in? Have they taken alternate routes? And also, what has been the effect on other parts of the city? Because I know this is a target for many people, this program. How has it affected in terms of speeding up or slowing down or people movement? It sounds like it's improved throughout the city, but places like the George Washington Bridge, has it affected it?
Yeah, great question. So the question was,
Sorry.
Yeah.
So behavior,
Behavior, how are folks changing besides the overall reduction? What's happening outside the CBD on other roads and then just transit generally? So to the first one, for behavior, one of the things you can see is one of the things I'll just say is fun about open data is that everyone can look at this. They can see how is people changing their behavior by different detection point. And I think you saw here, some folks are no longer choosing to go in during peak hours and they're shifting their behavior to less congested times after 9 o'clock, spreading that out in a way that kind of keeps all of these roads below the critical threshold where congestion happens. We're doing analysis right now, I'll say, on sort of how certain pairs of entries and exits have changed, whether vehicles are spending less time in the CBD. So I'm not going to share those yet, but those will be perhaps in another talk. To the question of what's happening outside on the George Washington Bridge, we are seeing about the same vehicle traffic there this time as we did last year. So in general, congestion has been growing in the region. Speeds have been going down across all parts of the city. We have not seen anything that has suggested that that has accelerated in any place. And the absolute count of vehicles on the Cross Bronx and the George Washington Bridge are unchanged after this program. And I think I really enjoyed that kind of Stanford paper because it does get at this question a bit as well. You see that the reduced vehicle trips are leading to faster speeds on roads, not just in the CBD. And then to folks using transit, I don't have the specifics around, these subway routes have seen greater ridership, but in general, more folks are using the system. And one place where we've actually seen a lot of growth is on our express bus fleet. So a lot of folks, particularly in Staten Island, more are opting to take our express buses to come into the CBD. And that's grown about, I want to say it's about between 5,000 and 10,000 more daily riders this January versus last January on our express buses.
any indication of carpooling? Increased?
None that I can cite right now, but I think that's a great question that I hope folks will study.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your questions. Let's take the question over here from the person with the blue cardigan.
Thanks for the talk. My name is Rowan. I have two questions, if that's okay. One is,
Can't hear them.
do you think the data could be used for congestion pricing is whether it works or how we can do those solve? In your opinion, what are some of those benefits related to traffic? And the second is, what is the response from taxi and rideshare drivers in response to the impact on taxis and rideshare rides?
Yes. All right. Thank you, Rowan. So two questions. So the first question was, what would happen? What could these cameras be used for if congestion pricing were to end for some reason? I'm not going to comment on that one. I think the law is pretty clear that congestion pricing is a state law and is moving into effect. And so there have been a lot of court cases, all of which have sided in favor of congestion pricing. So we expect that to continue as the story continues. To the question on rideshare, so how has been the response from yellow taxis, Ubers, and Lyfts? I'll share this was actually a thing that our team also spent a lot of time in those 7 weeks, was making sure that would continue to work. So folks who take a trip within Lower Manhattan, they get either a 75-cent or a $1.50 additional fee for taking a trip within the zone. And that required actually a lot of work with their tech teams to make sure that the Polygon was going to work, that we caught customer complaints right away. If folks were, there was one instance of a garage that was halfway down 60th Street that was causing some false positives that we identified in the first day and fixed right away. And I think in general, the response has been positive, mostly because it's worked. There have not been technical issues. This toll is applied and everyone's kind of able to continue their business while serving the goals of the program. And I'll just mention, I think actually on yellow taxis specifically, that segment of the industry is seeing much higher growth year over year. That's more due to, I want to say, Uber's ability to cross dispatch onto yellow taxis, but they're up about 20% year over year in terms of their trips right now. So, and that's also on open data. The TLC releases all of that on open data.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll take a question over here. Person with the red mask.
Misha Avrik, pronounce he, him.
great to hear that buses are more reliable now. Is there any data on the school bus behavior and whether that has improved?
There is. It's not data that has come from our team, but I believe, I have the name of the company wrong, but the largest school bus operator, I think they do about 10% of school bus trips. They were covered in Street's blog a month or two ago saying they had seen same thing, faster on-time performance, better reliability, and they were essentially using their GPS data from what they had seen post-launch to the period before. So I don't have those numbers in front of me, but if you Google New York City School Bus Streets blog, their team has some good data out there to take a look at.
All right, let's take another question from the middle. The person with the checkered shirt, or right, yeah.
Sorry, Spencer Maines, he, him. The AAR acronym showing the alternatives that have seen increased traffic, that's not the Association of American Railroads, right? What
That's
is that?
not the association, but thank you for, yes, what is it? That is our Access-a-Ride program. So that is our paratransit service. So yes, Access-a-Ride is what that stands for.
So many. Let's take another question over here. Person in the gray shirt.
Yeah. Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay. I know that you're just starting to collect the data on this, but let's say, years down the line, you could redraw the CBD or maybe expand it outside of the region it's in now. Have you had any thoughts on the team about, based on the incoming data, what that might look like or what your wish list might look like?
Ooh, a good question. Well, let me say I think, so the boundaries of the CBD, I think, is more perhaps a community and political discussion than something that, the current boundaries, I think, well, it kind of goes, I think Mayor John Lindsay in the 60s kind of had some of the original proposals for this. It goes back that far. I know there was a lot of discussion between Albany community groups on whether the Queensboro Bridge would be included, and that involved studying a lot of what would happen on the Queens side of the bridge, and it being included was a big part to kind of make sure there wasn't traffic diversion hitting neighborhoods over there. So I think what's good about this kind of program is that discussion happens in the open. So I don't have a thought, but I hope you do, and I hope you'll bring it to the next version of this policy. Yeah.
Awesome. All the way over there, white shirt, black mask. Yes, thank you.
You mentioned earlier that there was a 3-day-ish delay for times when the camera wasn't able to identify the vehicle. How is that reflected in the next day data, and is there any plans to reduce the significance of the delay?
Yes, so that affects, it's a relatively small percentage of the transactions. The question is, how is that 3-day manual review handled in the data? So for this, we externally release data with that 3-day lag. So we essentially want to make sure that the data is complete, and that's when we release it. And then we also make sure that if there's ever an issue that comes up, so for example, someone disputes their toll, the customer was right, there was a mistake, and that changes one vehicle entry for, like, say, January 27th, we update that as well. So this is always a historically updating, like, full view of vehicle entries that you will find on open data. To the question of what, I think this is maybe just more of a fun process question, if folks are interested. We had that 3-day lag of having complete data, but of course people want to know, ourselves included, right away what happened next day. We actually built a pretty good internal forecast. In your row is someone who built that forecast, who essentially said, like, based on detections, can we come up with an estimate of where we think vehicle entries are going to be? And it's actually been accurate within about 2%. So that's purely for our internal understanding, but an example of how you, with a little bit of data science techniques, can solve around some of those operational constraints.
All right. Person with the black sweater.
Thank you for the great talk. I wanted to ask more about the technical side of things. What were some challenges that you ran into with your computer vision algorithm? And then how do you handle vehicles where the license plate might be obscured or not visible? I guess I'm asking, like, is there a difference in terms of the reliability based on vehicle type, and like computer vision algorithms are not equally reliable across different objects, for example?
My understanding, so it's the question of how, the vehicle computer vision piece. So the way that the team does this is that they do a lot of back testing. So essentially they either send vehicles through the camera system or they review, there's also a video camera on there. So they look at, how do we measure the test and training data of what's coming through and how's the computer tagging it versus what is coming through. This I don't think I can say the actual number, but it is very low. It's less than 1% really of times when we're seeing like real obscured plates or like issues of tagging. What is fun though is I do talk to this team pretty often, and I feel like every week they come with like 5 examples of like the craziest thing they saw on the camera this week. Of they're like, there's this hotel and they started letting us park cars overnight and that's messed it up, and now we've developed this cool workaround. Or this was a halal cart that was attached to a sedan and we like didn't know how to tag it, but we like figured out the halal cart piece. So there's like, the team I think is always going through these examples and always making improvements throughout. So it's been cool to watch them do it because they're quite good at it.
Person in the back over here with the brown sweater.
Hi, I'm a student from Brooklyn College, and I see. So it's cool to see that 82K fewer vehicles because of the congestion pricing. But I wanted to know if there were any efforts made to kind of know who the 82 vehicles were, because oftentimes with financial barriers come with some sort of racial barrier, kind of like an implicit connection between the two. So I wanted to know if there were any efforts, or will there be any efforts to kind of make sure that that's not an issue.
Yes, great question. So the question is, who is not coming and how has that changed? The 82,000, we don't have kind of a physical, this person came from these places, but the question of how it's changing is being currently studied. So this is kind of the quick view of the data, but the legislation mandates a 6-month review in writing and an annual review, and those are going to be much more involved reports. And that question is being looked at, essentially, how is the geography showing up here in terms of where vehicles are coming from.
All right. Person with the yellow shirt, yellow long sleeve shirt. Yep. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nadeshta. Pronouns are she, her, hers. My question is related to, you mentioned a little bit about the fact that restaurants are seeing a higher increase in reservations and all that stuff. I think one of the biggest questions or kind of issues was also presented around this was how this is impacting small businesses or impacting businesses in general when it comes to the fact that, delivery truck drivers are going to get hit with this. How is it going to impact our delis, are kind of just more smaller businesses? Is there any information on that impact and whether prices have increased because of this, or how the communities are reacting to this?
Yes. So the question on, right, what is this doing to not just restaurant reservations, but the rest of Lower Manhattan? This is where I think, if I have to put on my data science manager hat, that correlation does not equal causation, and we are all looking through this, unable to kind of test these things. And what's going on right now, there are many things that go into the price of something. This is one factor, but there are many things going on in the global supply chain that also play a role. But so far, generally, we're continuing to see small businesses reporting greater sales. Folks have looked at kind of credit card spend. These are folks outside the MTA, so I'm not citing it too strongly. But I've looked at retail spend and credit card data, and are continuing to find annual growth in spend in the CBD. And I've been surprised that my deli has not raised prices on my egg and cheese in the morning, despite the cost of eggs going up. So that's an anecdote, but I've just been impressed with my deli down there. But I would say that's something that hopefully we as a community can continue to look at as well.
We only have 3 minutes left, and we got a lot of questions. So before we take another one, is there a way we can reach you or your team?
Yes, I think, here, I'll jump back to, I'll put my email up if folks want to reach out to me. There's also Open Data at mtahq.org, and we'll be here, for the day as well, if anyone wants to catch me or a few other folks on the team at lunch. So we are here if anyone wants to chat.
Awesome. Any more questions? Person in the white long sleeve over here.
Hi, my name is Nikhil, pronouns he, him. So I think many of us are aware of how fraught the legislative approval and review process was for congestion pricing. And I'm wondering how you see efforts like this kind of contributing to reducing some of that gridlock in the future and, I don't know, like giving us a little more control over our city.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty straight line in my mind. I think, I think there was a lot of debate around whether this program would go forward. And as soon as it launched, people wanted to know whether it was working and were looking for many opportunities to find that something was off. And I think sometimes what's more interesting is the headlines that don't happen. And I think the fact that the system worked right away, that everyone understood the traffic number right away, I think was really important for the conversation moving into what I think is a more productive place. You could rewind the tape. You could imagine an agency that doesn't know how to measure how many vehicles are coming in, what the difference is. People are calling into question the credibility. And I think when that happens, you're in a much trickier conversation. So I think these kind of efforts to tell this story clearly, I think give greater confidence in other civic institutions to do similar programs. They give a good roadmap for what should be expected of them as they do it. And I think, the more that you do these projects, the more practice everyone gets, including at the legislative level. So kind of the more you do it, the more you do it. And I think that's how I would draw the connection.
Thank you so much, Matt. We're at time. Let's give him a round of applause.